The Seekers. They came in the 70s like small swarms of black flies. They came to Maine, their promised land.
They came, burning-eyed young men with shoulder-length hair and dark beards and bell-bottoms and fried boots.
They came as fresh-faced women in long flowery skirts with Rapunzel-like hair tumbling down their backs.
Some of them came in shiny new pickups. They bought battered and abandoned saltwater farms, farms by rivers and waterfalls, farms with kerosene lamps, hand pumps, and outhouses. They reveled in their discomfort.
They came to escape the blackness of the world, the napalm of Vietnam, the hatred of Jim Crow laws. They had read Thoreau and Scott Nearing, and they believed in them.
Some came to escape the corporate world and the 3 martini lunches and the money, more money than conscience can bear. They came to go back to the land, the good life, to live off the land, a measure of self-sufficiency.
Some came to save their souls, their tattered lives, marriages. They came for peace and solace, romantics, seeking the noble savage within.
They came trading sports cars for plows. Some preferred horses to tractors.
They knew about books, ideas, suburbs and city sidewalks, but not about soil, tides, seasons, and country living.
They plowed, planted, picked, and stored their bounty. Some hayed naked and drank switchel.
Soft hands became proudly hard and calloused. Bones and muscles ached they didn't know they had.
Men talk mostly of wood piles, the new competition. How many cords? How much cut? How much split and stacked?
Women just talked, mostly to each other, struggling with newness, questions, and lonely isolation. Men's work and women's work made the separation broader, like a wide, unswimmable river.
Women weeded the gardens, gathered the bounty, bent over on hands and knees. Once manicured hands now split and red, dirt crusted under nails. They canned over steaming pots, on wood stoves, sweat rolling in the heat of Indian summer. Dinner still to be cooked, school lunches to be made, little ones to be tended, loved, and bathed, and kept from danger, clothes to be washed and hung, clutter and dirt to be conquered. Some of us found jobs in town, teaching, baking, cooking, and nursing, to pay the taxes, to buy groceries and gas. No time for pretty, old by 30.
They learned about robust sunrises, blushing sunsets, clear skies and constellations, stars and moons and tides.
They collected menageries like Noah and his ark, dogs, cats, goats, rabbits, chickens, pigs, and cows, fed and nurtured the animals, struggling not to love them too much as critters were there to earn their keep for milk, eggs, and meat. Slaughter not bucolic, not lyrical or tidy, just blood and death.
The children caught the mustard school bus after morning chores, smelling of sweet wood smoke and sometimes pungent barn. They were taunted with nuts and granola. All changed. Some stayed and flourished, reaping again and again. Some fled, defeated by winter, cold, and pain. Some adapted, found those skills they had, like teaching, selling, building, writing, and lawyering.
Some trust fund babies transformed again from hippie to yuppie, from yeoman to gentleman.
Their lives turned with the seasons, spring, summer, fall, and winter. 40 years gone by in a blink. Today, hair shorter, beards grayer, eyes softer and shoulders rounder. But still, we're alive.
Some found their dreams of peace and solace, of rekindled love. Some embittered, rave, disappointed, stare in angry silence.
They came, they passed their legacy, a gift to the new seekers, back to the landers with their own shadows, dreams, and secrets.
But the land stays the same, continues with offerings of its cycles, famines, and feasts.
My name's Jack. My father was a Presbyterian minister. Mostly I rejected all that church shit. I spent my childhood as class clown, rebel, underachiever. At 18, I went away to state college, glad to be out of my father's grip. I continued in my sinful ways. Drank, smoked, joined the Young Socialist Club, grew my hair and beard, dressed for the part, majored in political science. And all that bloody crap happened. JFK, slaughtered. Bobby, in his wake. Martin Luther King. A tragic trinity. Vietnam was raging, killing women and children. My heart exploded. I marched in anti-war protests, sat in sit-ins, fantasized about being a freedom rider, about going to steamy Alabama and Mississippi to register blacks to vote. Although I was spit at, beaten, and jailed, I never made it to the South. I guess all that Jesus stuff was in me after all. Classes were irrelevant. So was my pretty girlfriend, Molly. I quit school, and with some of my socialist pals, we pooled our coins, bought land in Nowheresville, Maine, to build a cabin and start our own peaceable kingdom.
No water is wide, I cannot get o'er, but neither have I wings to fly. Oh, go and get me some little boat, and both shall my love and I leaned my back up against an oak. I thought it was a trusty tree, but first it swayed a jewel when it is new, but love grows older and waxes colder and fades away like the morning dew.
I'm Molly. I was with Jack. I was one of those pretty girls with the long flowered skirts and Rapunzel-like hair. I was so in love with Jack. The kind of love that becomes a part of you, like your eyes and hands. I couldn't help it. It just was. I would have followed Jack to the moon had he asked me. Often, I did not fathom Jack's moods or rants. His peaceable kingdom dream I did not really understand. I was a painter, an artist. I had a love of beauty. Making the world a more beautiful place was my dream. It was late May when we first arrived in Maine. The fields of velvet green, the ancient lilac in boisterous blooms of purple and as big as a barn, the smell heaven. We lived in tents while the cabin was hammered into form, an intense camping trip. My job was shopper and cook, my kitchen, campfire, and hibachi. While the men pounded nails, I wandered with my paints, or lay in the fields of wildflowers making wreaths of daisies and buttercups for my hair. I was part of an impressionist painting. But then there was the baby coming.
I'm Ken, brother to Joe. I actually grew up on a farm in Michigan. Cows, horses, hay, and gardens. I hated it. I was expected, with my brother, to work in the barn, shoveling and feeding, milking, and general nurture. I liked the animals, but not the work. I preferred to work in the kitchen with my mother, baking bread, putting up the garden in jars filled with jeweled colors of tomatoes, beans, and corn. I loved making summer berry jams and pies. Altogether, although I was strong and well over 6 feet, my favorite pastime was to knit with my mother. We turned out together Norwegian sweaters, caps and mittens. The more complicated the pattern, the better. My father and brother smirked and teased me for doing these unmanly activities, calling me tiny. I escaped the farm to the university and later to New York. At university, I majored in art and found my niche as a weaver. In New York, I became part of a gallery circuit and sold my original tapestries, wall hangings, and tablecloths, napkins for outrageous prices. In this safety net, far from the provincialism of the Midwest, I came out. Celebrating my rebirth as a successful gay man was fantastic. I experimented, but also I fell in love. Then came the AIDS terror. The merry-go-round of joy stopped. Friends, people I loved, were sick and dying, awful deaths. It was then I decided to escape the city and find a country place. I moved to Maine, bought goats and chickens, and planted a garden. All my childhood lessons of work and self-sufficiency came home to roost. I was a farmer boy again and a weaver, but this time by choice.
I'm Joe, brother to Ken. Every summer, my wife Jenny and I took our annual pilgrimage to Ken's saltwater farm in Maine. Boyhood differences were put aside. Yeah, I was the macho one, Ken the sensitive one. We found our own ways in the world. He an artist, and I a forest ranger. He the dreamer, and I the realist. He went north, and I went south, following the jobs. Jenny and I ended up in sultry South Carolina, great in the winter, unbearable in summer. Maine's cooler summers beckoned us. Ken and his boyfriend, Ryan, gave us some land to build a cabin on and plant a garden. Thus our Maine odyssey began. Our cabin was all log, basic, no running water or electricity, a wood-burning stove and an outhouse. A blanket hung from the rafters to separate the living space from the bedroom. It was beautiful. Why would anyone need more? At first it served as a summer camp, until together we decided to make it our permanent home and become self-sufficient. I told Jenny that we would only haul to Maine what would fit in the pickup. This did not include our 2 old dogs. One at a time, I took them into the woods, prayed, shot, and buried them. My best college friend also moved to the area and took up farmsteading. At first, it seemed like a long holiday with family and friends. We were mostly connected by our radical convictions to live the good life. It bonded us into a loosely knit community of believers. But after 2 years, it was not enough for Jenny. She became more and more discontented. We fought, sometimes violently. Finally, Jenny left for Boston and law school and never looked back. It hurt more than I let on. I later married a professional organic gardener, thinking it a better match. But that didn't work either, nor did my last romance with a younger woman. At 70, I had a massive stroke, and mostly just sit in silence and stare now. What is it all about?
Joe was the handsome quarterback, and I was the cheerleader. Hi, I'm Jenny. Joe and I were both at the top of our class in our Kalamazoo High School. Yes, we were rising stars slated to be successful, high school sweethearts. Boy, we were really in love. We went off to the university together, and one steamy night, Joe and I eloped. For a while, this new status made us feel like real grown-ups. We made friends with other young married students, and this worked for me. I was bored with the dating and carousing. Playing house was fun. However, when reality hit, we found it hard to balance school with the new responsibilities of money, or lack of, housekeeping, jobs, and I was a lot more social than Joe. We graduated and moved to South Carolina. Joe got a job as a forest ranger. The 60s South was quite an adjustment. Joe was happy enough in the woods talking to the trees, and I definitely was not a Southern belle. I needed more than tea parties and shopping, tea parties and shopping, and tea parties and shopping. I found a job as a law clerk, and I loved it. However, this job antagonized my sense of social justice. I welcomed summer vacations in Maine, and the live and let live attitude I witnessed there. Joe's and my differences seemed to surface more and more, and I began to wonder if it had been just lust that had bonded us at one time. Moving to Maine sounded wonderful, a complete change from the rigid social rules of the South. I hoped, and boy did I hope, that it would bring Joe and me closer again. Cabin living in the summer was sweet. Fall was breathtaking with its crimson and golds. Winter got long, very long. Hauling wood and water got old. Even making a cup of tea was hard. On these icy days, I longed for a real soaking bath, real bubbles, and oodles of hot water. Then I dreamed of wine in long-stemmed glasses and white tablecloths. The Maine winter darkness was driving me crazy, even more than the isolation of the snow and the sub-zero temperatures. Joe was happy as a pig in shit. If I heard one more time about how much wood he had split and stacked, I was going to go stark raving mad. Then there was the wood smoke, its sweet, pungent smell that permeated every crack and chink in the cabin, the bedding, my clothing, my hair. After 2 years, I left. I ran away to Boston in law school.
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I was 12 and hated milking the goats before I went to school and after school. But for once I was thankful for these heavy-uddered French alpines. It was one of those sudden warm spring Maine days when baseball and ice cream cones seemed perfect. Marring this scene was a poor dead mother porcupine with her baby in a dog's drooling mouth. I rescued the tiny ball of a baby from the dog, nestled it in the soft leather of my baseball glove, and brought it home. I begged my parents to keep it. An old wooden box filled with hay was readied for the baby and tucked behind the wood stove. We eyedropper-fed Porky with warm goat's milk and honey. She thrived and grew fat and naughty, so naughty that she had to leave the house and live in the barn with the goats. At milking time, she would hang around the goats and get warm white squirts of her beloved milk straight from the teats. During the day, she waddled after us and climbed up our arms and sat on our shoulders and nibbled our ears, gently. She smelled of pineapple and coconut. She would stand up on her back legs, take an apple in her hands, and eat it. Then one afternoon, while milking the goats, in a fit of frustration, I kicked Porky when she climbed up my leg, begging for her treat. She stood up, shook herself, turned, looked at me, and left for the wild. I cried.
For strong winds that blow lonely, 7 seas that run dry, all these things that don't change, come what may. But our good times are all gone, and I'm bound for moving on. I'll look for you if I ever back this way. If I get there before the snow flies, and if things are going good, you could meet me if I sent you back the fare. But by then it would be winter, ain't so much for you to do. And those winds sure can blow cold way out there.
Heather here. I first noticed Michael at the Night Owl Coffee House, had a pop-up poetry reading. I don't remember any of the poets. Michael, on the other hand, looked so quietly intense and seemed to savor their every word. I was restless and only half listening. During the break, I got up to stretch and leave when Michael introduced himself. He talked at me about existentialism, Eastern religions, and true enlightenment. What I really liked, though, was that he did yoga regularly. Being a dancer, that did it for me. He was different, I was bored. We got married and bought the farm in Maine. He was seeking spiritual happiness through physical labor and being one with the seasons. I just wanted to dance and transformed one of the front rooms into a dance studio with a bar and floor-to-ceiling mirrors, waiting for students and dancing soulmates.
I hailed from Connecticut, but at an early age was sent off to boarding school by my parents. Later at college, I studied philosophy and Eastern religions. At 20, I proclaimed myself a Buddhist. At a coffee house in Cambridge, I met Heather. She proclaimed herself a dancer, New Age interpretive. She looked it, slender, leggy, and lithe. It was love at first sight. We married in a whirlwind and quickly decided to pool our trust funds, buy a saltwater farm in Maine outright, and be back to the Landers. We moved to an antique red cape on a back road, bought chickens, planted a huge vegetable garden. We recycled lots of chicken manure in our garden while we had zucchinis as big as a baseball bat. We opened a farm stand. Later on, we sent the soil out to be sampled. The results? Toxic. So we decided to buy a cow and start a sheep farm instead.
Henry, the local farmer. Michael and Heather over there, they were my neighbors from away. Nice kids, but real strap hangers. Yep, they bought a cow all right, but no ordinary cow for them. No, sir, it was an imported prize-winning Jersey with royal lineage. Yes, she was a beauty. Doe brown with the most sorrowful eyes I have ever seen. I know that friggin' cow cost more than my blue Ford pickup truck. And they bought these fancy sheep too, not like any I had ever seen before, and I have farmed here all my life. In early spring, Michael came to ask me a favor. Would you please, Henry, take care of my animals for 2 weeks while Heather and I go skiing with my family in Switzerland? What could I say but yes? He was always so polite. What a 2 weeks. First off, the poor cow, tied in the stall, was standing on a mountain of her own manure. Her poor tail had been tied up so long that it had fallen clean off. I was sick. I called the vet and shoveled shit. Well, everyone knows that sheep lamb in the spring, and that spring in Maine can be iffy. This particular spring was wicked cold. The ice was still thick on the pond. Then the snow came and the lambs started coming in the worst nor'easter storm ever, completely unprotected. I helped those little lambs the best I could. Geez, some people think enlightenment shines out of their arse.
My parents called me Maggie. I was 6 when my family moved to Maine for the good life. I never understood why we left our new house in the neighborhood with lots of kids to play with. I called it our shiny house. The main house was at least 100 years old and shabby. It had a pump for water, a wood cook stove, and a smelly outhouse. What were my parents thinking? What I grew to love in my new life on the farm was all the animals. Cats, dogs, chickens, turkeys, goats, and pigs. As a grown woman, I still collect animals, especially those in need of love.
Are you going to Scarborough Fair? Parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. Remember me to one who lives there. She once was a true love of mine. Ask her to make me a cambric shirt, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, without a seam or needle.
They call me Ma, but my name is really Carolyn. And I've been married to Adam for 47 years. All I ever wanted to do was to find and marry my Prince Charming and have babies. I went to college because it was expected of me. I had no particular intellectual passion or interest. And then my dream happened. I met Adam and fell in love. We married in our sophomore year. I quit school and stayed home to take care of the babies that came fast. I got my MRS degree, and Adam eventually got his BA in English. He always provided well for us, even when he was working and going to class. It was really hard on him. But eventually we moved to the Connecticut suburbs. We lived in a tidy house with a lovely view of the valley. Adam worked in the city. His job was as a children's book editor for Harper Row. And boy, was he a success. The money just rolled in. But he was gone a lot. We lived together, but in parallel worlds. Not as happy as we had been as young married. But with some of that extra money, Adam and I bought an old farmhouse in Maine as a getaway. We bought it outright. Very rustic, no running water. Indoor plumbing or electricity, nah. When Adam, weary from New York and the grind, suggested that we become back to landers in Maine, I was overjoyed. You better believe it.
It is early spring. I'm Adam. One of those teasing warmer days with blue skies and bright sun. I sit in this barn with a cup of coffee. I rest between grading papers. I relax, contented with my old friend Dolly, a brown donkey. My wife Carolyn, what do you call Dolly?
Oh, you know I call it Adam's Folly.
Oh, but I love that donkey.
We know.
If Dolly and I were cats, we would be purring now. The light beams through the boards in slanted rays like heaven's light in old paintings. I escaped the city, the 3 martini lunches with too much money. The farm to me was heaven. I remember when the barn was full of animals, mostly goats, chickens, and turkeys, and of course, Dolly. I would come on a below-zero winter's morning to tend the creatures and find it surprisingly warm and peaceful. I always found the animal breath mixed in a potpourri of hay and manure to be pleasant. On such mornings, the Christmas story of the babe in the manger, surrounded by friendly beasts, made perfect sense to me.
I love the simplicity of that life. If I had a passion, it was cooking and preparing food. I tried lots of original and creative recipes. Some of them were fabulous and others, well, not so. I reveled in gardening, canning, making jams and jellies. Lots of people raved about my pickles. Baking was my specialty, and I loved doing it on our old wood stove. I baked and cooked in the Congregational Church's kitchen for a Meals on Wheels program. I launched an organic catering business for a while and loved making wholesome carrot wedding cakes. I had read all of the Little House on the Prairie books to our 3 children, and truthfully, I was really happy just being Ma on our saltwater farm.
I love this barn. When Caroline and I and the 3 kids moved here 40 or so years ago. It needed help. I rebuilt the sills, raised it, and reshingled the roof. It was so satisfying. For the house, I built and installed a wood furnace to keep us warm. After digging the muck from the outhouse that first spring, we did find the money for indoor plumbing. I did admire the sculptural shape of the hand pump, however, in the kitchen, but being able to take a hot bath was beautiful. My greatest joy was my acre garden hidden in the back, my secret garden. I planted everything, starting in the spring with radishes and spinach and peas and coal frames. I grew lettuce, tomatoes, onions, beans, and peas, potatoes, summer and winter squash, and even pumpkins. Word was out that on hot days I worked in the garden in my underpants and boots. We were all buff in those days from the physical labor. That first Thanksgiving was magnificent. We only ate what we grew, even the turkey. We foraged for wild cranberries in a stream on our property. It was a feast. We drank goat's milk and Caroline made cheese. It was all our version of the good life.
You know, speaking of the good life, Adam actually knew Helen and Scott Nearing.
Yes, I did. My most memorable visit was when Scott was about to turn 100 years old. His wife Helen invited me in. Scott, lying on the wooden coffin he had built for himself, looked shrunken and desiccated and said, "I am going to die on my birthday. 100 is long enough." And he did.
Well, another interesting story you have is about haying.
I had a large barn, and I was asked by a fellow farmsteader if he could store some hay in it. Suddenly, I heard this whooping and hollering, and up the road from the village came the flatbed truck loaded down with bales of hay, and noisy, happy hippie helpers with everything flapping and dangling in the breeze, brother.
Those were the days, Adam, those were the days.
They were, weren't they? It was and still is a good life, but different now. Thoreau didn't stay in the woods for 40 years. Today I work as an English professor at the university instead of farmsteading. For creatures, we have only Dolly, my donkey,
Still haven't.
and Al, our tabby cat. For garden, I plant mostly flowers and herbs: zinnias, cosmos, sunflowers, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme. We eat from the garden in summer, but not all winter long. We found the land to be a gift of love and serenity. Sometimes, Carolyn, I feel it was all a dream. I'm writing a book about it. I hope I finish this one. What should I call it? Perhaps I shall call it The Seekers.
But the land stays the same, continues with its offerings of its cycles, famines, and feasts.
Please join us in